So the diagram or the picture that you see in the screen is kind of an image, a drawing of chapter 37, which we will look at toward the end of our study this quarter. But chapter 37 is a pivotal chapter, not only in Ezekiel, but in the Bible in general. It has perhaps one of the most powerful images of hope in the book of Ezekiel and also throughout the Bible. And God asks Ezekiel, he takes him in the vision to this kind of a place, and Ezekiel sees something similar to what you're looking at right now. And God says, son of man, the phrase in the Hebrew is Ben Adam, like the word Adam is the word man in Hebrew. So Ben Adam, can these bones live? And Ezekiel, he's really doubtful. I mean, this is not what you think of as something that is vibrant and full of life, right? So he sort of skirts the issue and he says, oh Lord, you know. And he's basically admitting, I haven't a clue. I don't know, but you know. And the vision, he tells him to speak to those bones, like if they're an audience, if they can listen to you. Go ahead and talk to them. And Ezekiel does something like that, but then the bones start to rattle, and they start to stand up, and then the ligaments start, and the musculature starts to develop, and then the eyes inside the socket start to organically function. And this is what he sees. Can these bones live? And so this vision of utter death, I mean, total devastation, from that kind of a situation, God can give life. This is really the message of the Bible, is it not? The message of the Bible is that whoever believes in Jesus should not perish like that, but instead what? Have everlasting life. That's what I mean when I say this is perhaps Ezekiel's most powerful prophecy of hope. And there's a lot of images that we'll be looking at in this reading as we go through to see the images that he develops. To kind of use the outline of the prophets that we were looking at from the minor prophets last time, you can see that you can divide the prophets in historical periods, and the middle period is really the focus of the exile, of the Babylonian exile that took place in its full force in 586 BC, or 587, depending on the detailed historical chronology that you use. But it's the same one. It's just shifted a little bit based on where you start your beginning point. But 586, 587, the point is right in that period of time is when the exile was in full force. And people were carried off. And they were going to be there for at least 70 years. So the 70 years is not a short period of time. It's not eternity. It's not forever. But it's not like you're going to, go home anytime soon. It's not like, well, let's just bring a tent and go camping because we're on a... No, it's not for that. You're there for long. You might as well build a house. You might as well get married. You might as well have children. You might as well learn the language of the Chaldeans. You might as well learn to live and stay and have some measure of enjoyment while you're there, because you're going to be there a long time. And oh, by the way, the reason why this happened is because of your sins. And the message of the prophets is basically that the vicissitudes of history were not just a strange twist of fate, but instead they were the direct, intentional act of God. Now, it doesn't look like that in the actual historical circumstances of the Assyrians coming on the scene, and then later the Babylonians coming on the dominant scene of the ancient Near East, or later on the Medes and the Persians, or Alexander the Great with the Greeks coming on, and then later on the Romans, and you have all these the Romans occupying the land of Israel in the time of Jesus of Nazareth. And, the people were living there, and they didn't know why all these things were happening to them. And if they were just to focus on what God had said to them, they would realize that this is not just a strange twist of fate or the historical things that go on all the time, but this was God's plan. And the thing about reading the Bible, understanding it by faith as we understand it's the Word of God, then that gives us a perspective. It gives us a theoretical framework in which to interpret our existence. That's what this is. It tells us where we came from, who we are, and where we're going. These are the great philosophical questions that people have been asking since the beginning of time. What is life? What is man? What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Where am I going when all this is over? It seems so inevitable and tedious and meaningless sometimes. In fact, there was a book in the Bible that says, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. What profit is there of all the labor that a man does his whole life? And the implication, no profit at all. And the message in that particular book, which we have studied many times here at Citrus Park, is that without the perspective of God in your life, that's exactly what it is. It is meaningless. If you do have God in your life, then there's meaning. And he paints that horrible picture just to give the sense of accomplishment at the end of the book, where it tells us at the end what the meaning is. But you have to sometimes you have to kick people down or point out just how miserable things are and give them the purpose of why they need God in their lives. Now, the good thing, if we could say it this way, of all the evil that we have seen in recent years in the world and in our country, and it's very easily to access through our devices that we have. I mean, sometimes it tings and bings and makes noises, and it tells us what evil has happened here and there and everywhere. So we can hardly escape knowing about stuff. The good thing, if there is something good about all this evil around us, is that it just makes the case very obvious that we need God in our lives. And if we do our part, and I think that our focus at Citrus Park is to do this and to let our light shine before others in the world, that they might see our good works and glorify our Father which is in heaven. If we let our light shine in that way, then the people that see the meaninglessness of life will be able to look to us and maybe ask a question. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to expect it. We need to expect that questions will come, or that conversations will come, or that dialogues will happen, discussions will happen. And are we going to be ready for it? Are we going to be prepared? Have we taken the forethought to, okay, when and if my friend Joe at work asks me this, because we've been talking about this on lunchtime, what should I say? And will I be prepared to say it? Or what verses might I point him to that he could read at home, and then we can talk about it later next week? Or so. In other words, plan, think, have an intention about it. In the Old Testament, God called these men. Sometimes they were minding their own business, doing something else, and they had no clue that God was going to tap them on the shoulder and say, you know what? You're my man. Tell you what we're going to do. I mean, Amos was a shepherd and a tender of sycamore trees, and he was minding his own business in Tekoa. And God says, leave Tekoa and head north. I want you to go to Bethel in Israel and prophesy against it. He didn't know that he was going to be doing that. He was just enjoying his life, taking care of sheep and sycamore trees and so forth. But God told him to go do this. He was the right man for the job. And so he went. We studied that last quarter. Now we're looking at a man who is from a priestly family and was involved in the the worship of God in the temple cult that was in Jerusalem, and he was one of the captives in 597. The second deportation that took place, not the final one, which was 586, but in 597, King Jehoiakim of Judah was captured and taken off into Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel went with him. And many other nobility and young people went. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they were already there. They went in 605 and were part of that group, the biggest that went, of the more talented people in the land. And when they got there, they had to, they were selected. They looked out at all that they had, and they selected the wisest and the brightest and the healthiest, and they gave them special king's food. And of course, they rejected some of that. No, we don't want to eat that. And they said, you have to eat it. You're getting trained, and you're going to, when we're going to stand, you're going to stand before Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to have an audience with the mightiest man in the world. You are not going to look second class. We're going to make you look the best. You're going to shave. We're going to give you the best clothes. You're going to have the greatest health. You're going to exercise program. We're going to give you all of the food. And they says, okay, let's eat just the vegetables. And if we look healthy enough, then you can judge. And so the leader said, fine, you can have vegetables. And God blessed them, and they were the strongest and the most fit. And he said, okay, fine, it's working fine. That kind of program would last 3 years. That, I don't know what you can call it, internship or entrepreneurship, but they had to be trained, and they had to learn the language of the Chaldeans, and they had to do all these kinds of things. And then only when they had been absolutely tested and vetted and the very best, then they got the chance to stand before Nebuchadnezzar. It was a different kind of existence for Ezekiel. He was not in the nobility class. He did not live in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He lived in shambles along a tributary of the Euphrates called the Kibar Canal. We call it Kibar. In the Hebrew, it would be Kavar. In any case, that's where he was with the captives when the hand of God came upon him. All right, so we'll look at that in a moment, but you see in the red here on the screen that Ezekiel is, let's see if I've got it here. I don't know why this doesn't work here. All right. At least I have it in red there. Ezekiel, and then we're going to look at 3 or 4 chapters per week. On the left-hand side, you can see my tentative schedule for us. And hopefully what we can do is put this slide, or the dates at least, on the website so that you can look at that if you're reading. I know that we're having a lot of reading. Every year we do a new organized reading, and Matt has done a great job organizing that for us every year and giving us the kinds of things that we should read, so that if we stick to that schedule 5 days out of the 7 days per week, then we will finish reading the entire Bible in 1 year. And that's a worthy objective. That's very helpful for us. And some of the parts of the Bible might be your favorite, and other parts kind of not so, they're not as familiar. I know there's some long listed genealogy names, and sometimes some names hard to pronounce and so forth, that may not be our favorite passages, but at least we know, okay, this has some kind of a list of people. In the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, for example, there's a list of people that kind of shows how Jesus comes from certain people. And there's value in that to show a line of descent. So, let's see here. There we go. We've been noticing that the books of the prophets have recurring themes. And there are 3 major themes that seem to come up every time we read one of these prophetic books. And these themes are a description of sin that the people typically of Israel and Judah and sometimes specific cities like Samaria or Jerusalem are outlined. And the reason that God is going to judge the people and send them to punishment or give them a bad existence in captivity is because of their sins. If we go back to the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments or the covenant that was made at Mount Sinai, God had promised the people that they would be blessed, but it was conditional. If you obey me and you do my will, then you will be blessed in the city and you'll be blessed in the country. Your house will be blessed. The rain will come in its season. Your kneading bowl will be blessed. If they had microwave ovens back then, God would say, your microwave is going to be blessed. Your refrigerator is going to be blessed. It's always going to be full. This kind of a thing. All the implements and things that were typical of their life in that period of history was discussed and mentioned so that they could relate to, okay, everything in my existence is going to be blessed. What's the if? The if is if you obey God and do his will, you'll be blessed. Okay, what's the other side? Well, if you don't obey the voice of the Lord your God, then you will be cursed in the city, and you'll be cursed in the country. And you'll be cursed with bad weather. The rain won't come when you expect it. And your kneading bowl will be cursed. And the bread that you knead or bake will be cursed, and all of these kinds of details. Why? Because of your sins. The prophets are God's messengers to come upon the scene later, to remind the people, oh, do you want to know why all of these bad things are happening and captivity is taking place? Or in Ezekiel's case, they're already there. They're already on the banks of the Euphrates River in the shanty camps that they were, miserable existence, the place where they were just eking out a living. They were already there. And God's hand comes upon him and tells him, Ezekiel, speak to these people. And they needed to know why they were there and why it was going to be a long time. They needed to know that. That's the first message, sin, and then number 2, judgment. The third point of the prophets that were mentioned in Ezekiel, and all of the prophets really, is the hope of the future. The hope of the future that was going to come by God. God was not going to totally, utterly devastate them forever, but he was going to punish them sufficiently, and then he was going to move on and punish the other people that had punished them, the nation. So you'll notice that in number 3 here, the first point under number 3 is that they would be returning to the land. They would get to go back home. Right now in Ezekiel, the message is that they're there in captivity. They're living in captivity. They're existing miserably, but they're still existing in captivity. But they will get to go home someday. And we read about that in certain historical parts of the Bible as well. The reversal point, number 2, under section number 3 there, is that the enemies of Israel will be judged. That's good news for the Israelites. We might not think it's good news because they're getting punished. The people of Babylon who punished God's people were themselves going to be punished. And we might think, well, that's kind of negative. No, it's not negative for the people of Israel. It's good news for the people of Israel because their enemies that had punished them are going to go and get punished. That's good news for them. They're going to be able to go back home because of it. The third, and perhaps the most important point, is that there's going to be passages in these prophetic texts that point to a time when there's going to be a new covenant, that there's going to be a new period of time where there's going to be a righteous branch to David, for example, and the Messiah is going to come. These passages point to Jesus of Nazareth, and they point to the prophet that was supposed to come into the world. And so that's where all of this is going. And so if you look at the outline of this book of Ezekiel, I've put it up here I know the print is a little bit small. Next time I'll make a smaller picture and bigger words. The introduction we're going to look at today, mainly chapter 1. Next week we'll look at chapters 2 and 3. But this is the beginning of it. It tells us this, it sets the stage for what this book is all about. Then you have, second point is that there are oracles against Israel and Judah. This is equivalent to point number 1 in the previous slide. The sin of the people of Israel and Judah is going to be discussed in these chapters, 1 through 24. And the result of their sin is judgment. So the description and the detail about their judgment is going to be exposed in these chapters. Then chapters 25 through 32 focus on the oracles against the nations, and this refers to the point that I just mentioned a moment ago. If we go back to that slide, if you look at the second point under number 3, this is the theme of reversal, where the enemies of Israel and Judah will be judged. That's what Ezekiel is going to discuss in somewhat detail in chapters 25 through 32. And then the last point on this outline, you have messages of restoration and hope. That's going to be the last portion of Ezekiel, which takes us from chapter 33 of Ezekiel all the way to the end of the book in chapter 48. You will remember that the drawing that we began with this morning is in chapter 37. That is in the middle of this section that deals with hope. And the most powerful prophecy of hope that can be found in the book of Ezekiel is the valley of dry bones. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. Questions or observations on that introduction? I'm excited about this book, and I think that if we look at it and spend some time reflecting on it, not just what we have in class, but in our own readings, it will help us. And I encourage you to do that. Typically, when I go through a book like this, I'll have a little notebook or something. I'll have at least a piece of paper or something that I can write something down. In my case, I have some Bibles that I don't mind writing in and messing up, or and so I'll just write in the text itself, and I'll ask myself a question, or I'll write it down, and I'll say, okay, I need to look at this better. I don't quite get this. I need to study it more. And if we get into the habit of doing that individually, and then, of course, we have a family of faith here at Citrus Park with a lot of talented and wise leaders, we can ask a number of people questions that come up and kind of get feedback and maybe even look at resources that we can explore even further and that will help us. So I think that's another thing I'll mention this a little bit later in the evening sermon tonight about maybe strategies that we can use to make our Bible study more effective and more powerful in 2025. That might be a goal for us to adopt. So if you look at this text here, it says, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the Kibar Canal, or Kibar, however we want to pronounce it, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. That's a very powerful statement. One thing that I notice about reading this first paragraph is that there's probably, there are times when God speaks directly to an individual and they write down their image and their vision, and there's other individuals that God inspires to speak to the people. Think about Joshua, for example, who followed Moses. There's some evidence in the Pentateuch that Joshua or some other inspired writer made little annotated notes in the text. For example, chapter 34 of Deuteronomy describes in great detail the death of Moses and the burial of Moses and all of that. And so we have a choice to, as we think about it, we think, well, did Moses write this himself? Yes, it's possible. Is it the only possibility? When we think, no, well, no, God could have inspired someone else to give that particular account. Or in Numbers chapter 12, in verse 3, when the text tells us that Moses was the most humble man, more humble than any man on the face of the earth. So the question is, did Moses write that about himself? Or did Joshua or someone like him who was also inspired write that and insert that parenthetical observation about Moses? And of course, that's an interesting question, because if Moses wrote it himself, then it kind of, okay, goes against the idea that he was the most humble man. And so that's the idea. So I think that's something worth thinking about. And here in this passage, you will notice that verse 2 is written in the third person narration, and verse 1 is written in the first person narration, and verse 4 is written back in the first person narration. So in verse 2 then, on the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Kibar Canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. And then we go back to, it seems like Ezekiel speaking now, in verse 4. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and the flashing forth continually, and in the midst of it, as it were, gleaming metal, fire as it was gleaming metal. Some of the notes on this, the little note to the left of the word metal, sometimes some of your versions will say something like amber, bright amber colored fire, which looks like metal on fire. And so you have this glorious vision, and the idea here is that we looked at this a little bit earlier in the year, last year, when I had a series on the throne room of God, and we kind of got some of these prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel and John and Revelation, and what their experience was with being propelled spiritually or in vision form, or however the form was, in the very throne room of God with all the angelic hosts, and what that would have been like. And the reason that these images are given to us in such powerful form is for us to have this response of awe and absolute amazing reaction to it, because this is what it would be like to be in the very presence of God. And so when we read this, we need to realize that this is what its purpose is. The purpose is to give us a picture of what it would be like to be in the very presence of God. Because if you get in the presence of God, then He can tell you, and you have the credentials, therefore, to repeat what He tells you. You repeat what He tells you to the people, even though they might not listen. And the book of Ezekiel, as well as other prophetic books, tell the prophets, listen, the people that I'm sending you to are a stubborn people. They are stiff-necked and stubborn and uncircumcised in heart, and there's all kinds of ways to describe it, but they're not going to listen to you. And by extension, we need to think about that as God's people today. We are called to go into all the world and preach the gospel to everyone. Will everyone listen to us? No. Will most people listen to us? No. But a few will. Some will. And this is a theme throughout the Bible, including what Jesus said very explicitly, straight and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. Whereas broad and wide is the way that leads to destruction, and many are they that go that route. And that has always been the case. And so this imagery of chapter 1 is just very striking and powerful. We might say, well, what are these? What is the meaning of the meaning of this? Is basically we're in the presence of God. So now, outside of actually taking video of that presence of God, there's nobody that had their cell phone. I said, I got a new iPhone or something. Okay, I'm going to take a picture of the throne room of God, and then I'll download it so that people can get the picture, and they can upload it and they can see it for them. That's not how it happened. How did it happen? The picture words that we're about to read is how it happened. And so in verse 5, and from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the form of men, but each had 4 faces. Now just imagine that. What would a creature look like with 4 faces? You know, some of you might have purchased calendars for 2025. We have one that has sort of landscapes that are beautiful. Sandy always gets those, and we enjoy looking at that all the time on our refrigerator and writing notes to ourselves what we got to do this week or this month. Some people might get pictures of cats, you know, and then you have a picture of a cat. January, and next February you got another cat. All right, I want you to try to imagine a cat with 4 faces. Probably it would look all the same, but 4 faces. Well, what about one being a cat, another a dog, another a leopard, another a lion? I mean, what would that look? How would that look like? This is just bizarre, and it's written this way to pique our curiosity and to get us. We're not to try to say, well, okay, let's draw this out literally. You're welcome to do that, and many artists have tried. I remember having an early conversation with Sandy's dad. This was before we were married. And he, as a machinist who worked in a factory his whole life, said that it was possible to have wheels within wheels that can go this way and then that way. And he was trying to explain it to me as to how that might be. And of course, now these days we have, you know, been subject to all kinds of video things from Hollywood and in cartoons and different, where you can see, you know, some kind of spaceship that can go forward or backwards and any old way and it could be wheels within wheels. Anyway, think of that as we read these passages. They each had the form of a man, but they each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot. I'm thinking that's strength, maybe, or something that can uphold something. And they sparkled like burnished bronze. So this was not just, you know, organic flesh with fur or something. Under the wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. You think, well, why is it? The human hand is, you know, rather unique. We have an opposable thumb. We can do things that other creatures can't do. We can hold things up and turn it around and do all kinds of detailed. We could even be a surgeon if we wanted to. We could do surgery. That's how these things can work. So what this shows is very detailed power and capability. And the 4 of these creatures had their faces and their wings like this. Their wings touched one another, and they went every one straight forward without turning as they went. I suppose that's why you have 4 faces, because you have, you know, front, back, either side, and you can just propel yourself this way, back, that way. It's another way, ladies and gentlemen, of saying that God is omniscient and omnipotent. Those are big words. Someone explain it to us. What does the word omnipotent mean? All powerful, you can do anything, yeah. And then omniscient, what's that? Omniscient. Science, all-knowing, all right? And so all of these things, this is a picture way of describing those things. And we might think, well, Ezekiel, why don't you just say God is all-powerful? Isn't that simple? It is not as interesting, I have to tell you. It is just not as interesting. And it's not prophetic. Prophecy is figurative language. It's picture language. And apocalyptic literature is prophecy on steroids. And these kinds of images we see in the book of Revelation as well. 4 living creatures are described in chapter 4 of Revelation. And all these 24 elders and this group of people of 144,000. Was it literally 140? No, it's just everybody, a bunch of people. We're not supposed to take these things literally. It's a picture to give us an idea, a concept. And think about it. If we're trying to describe God, that's almost an impossible task. How do you do that? Especially when no one has really seen God. Moses got close, but he had to be in the cleft of a rock, and just the back of God would pass by. I mean, these kinds of things are there to give us this impression that, look, this is not an easy thing. And the whole movement of Ezekiel and prophecy and the Bible is to get us prepared to where we can actually be in the presence of God. And so these things are ways for us to think about getting close and getting to that situation. As for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man in front, and the face of a lion on the right side, and the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Now, let me ask you, why isn't it the face of a lamb or a squirrel or a possum or some meek beaver or something? I mean, what is it about an ox or a lion or an eagle? What's about those things? Those are strengths, right? Those are images of strength. You know, when we have a sports team and we're starting a new sports team and we want to, or maybe a new school and we're going to have a new mascot, a new sports teams, we think of things like, you know, bears, lions, eagles, maybe even falcons. Sandy and I went to a place that had beavers. You know, it was kind of a joke, really. These people come in their buses, these big basketball players come up, we're fighting the beavers? No problem. We can do it. The reason that you have eagles, oxes, and lions and so forth is to show strength and power. You're heading in the presence of God. And so what are the images of the most strong thing that we know, or the most powerful thing, or the most majestic, the eagle in the air? How majestic is that? Those are the images we see. And the point of all that is God is awesome. He's an awesome God. And these are just pictures to help us get that reality. You can read commentaries. There are dozens and hundreds and thousands of them out there that say, no, the eagle represents, you know, this. It's focusing on, Gog and Magog in chapter 38. This is Russia. This is China. This is the U.S. This is the Iranian treaty. Oh, please. And the reason that people can get away with that garbage, if I can be frank, is because the audience that they're speaking to have no scriptural or literature understanding at all. And so when they say, this is Russia, this is Iran, this is Xi Jinping or whatever, and that's they say, well, your guess is as good as mine, probably it's true, and at least this guy he's very gifted in his oratorical skills, maybe he's right, he wants my money, okay, I'll write a check. I mean, this is what happens in the religious world today. Are we out of time already? Okay. You can see how much material and the benefits are if we look at these things and think about them together. I'm going to do my best to give some insight as to the main thrust of what these things mean. But as you read, as you study, and as you write down your little notes and questions to yourself, please bring them to class. Make a question, make an observation. If you don't want to do it in class, you can ask me out of class or after class, and I'll bring it up the next time, and so forth. So this is an opportunity for us to think about these things together. All these flashes of lightning. Let me just read one more section here. If we look toward the end of chapter 1, verse 26, and above the firmament over their heads there was a likeness of a throne. We're talking about the throne room. And in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was the likeness, as it were, of a human form. All these images of angels and cherubim and seraphim and the four faces of eagle and lion. And so that's not what this person looks like. This image of someone above that throne looked very human. Keep in mind that in the beginning, God created man in his image. And upward from what had the appearance of his loins, I saw as it were a gleaming bronze, like the appearance of fire, enclosed round about. And downward from what had the appearance of his loins, or his midsection there, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness all around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So now we got rainbow image all around his midsection. Maybe it's his belt. Maybe the belt was a rainbow. Can you imagine that? I think my grandson Killian could imagine that, and he's got a new box of crayons with lots of colors. He could do that. He could draw that. And it would be worthwhile to do that. Just to get a picture. What might this look like? Like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around him. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And notice what Ezekiel did. And when I saw it, I fell on my face. And I heard the voice of one speaking. This is the introduction. And this is the image that Ezekiel saw. And the only thing that he could do at the result of that image was to fall flat on his face. And believe me, that's a normal and an appropriate reaction in this situation. But this sets the stage for the person that is about to talk to him. All right, next week we'll continue with our study of Ezekiel. Thank you.